welcome to today's episode of Comic Books and You. Today we're going to go through the Mythicals issue 1 from South River Studios, which is an indie group, I guess. It's the best way to describe it. So basically this was a Indiegogo slash Fund My Comic campaign, which did fairly well for its outing. Let's get through it like we do with most of those self-financed comics. Starting by looking at the campaign real quick. Right now, this is a screenshot from the Fund My Comic page that is currently up. It's a continuous campaign, no end date. You can order from there at any point in time. 10K raised in 4 months. Pretty good overall for a first campaign, especially from a, I would say, unknown team. I have no other details here as to that team working on any other projects together in the past. 239 backers, that's not a huge amount. There were a few big packages and a big offering that raised those prices really quickly. 239 is, like I said, not a huge amount of people having eyes on this campaign at this point, but it does show that the fans that there were for this did want to put out money for it, which is a very, very good point. You can get it for as low as $8 on a digital copy, $13 for a physical copy. Support small creators, everyone. That's always the mantra that I follow. It's usually worth it to help these people. They can easily grow, and we've seen it with Alpha Dogs before, as an example. Each campaign subsequently bringing a few more backers, and it's easy to make it into something half decent, or even being able to sustain yourself working on your projects. So the main character for this story is Nancy Moon, who's a young woman just out of college with a degree in criminal justice and a minor in computer science. Pretty good mix overall. She likely would have a good future ahead of her if she was not in a comic book. She seems to have a rather troubled past with various events in college that trigger her supernatural powers when they are discussed. She seems to have a control over plants and wood and fire from what we see in the cover, but we don't have much in the issue itself outside of the wood element at the end of it. Still, a good introductory character and more than likely our point of view character for this story overall. Another important character in this story is Director Loomis, who's the boss at a Level M organization of the government, who is currently trying to recruit Nancy. He doesn't seem to be fazed by supernatural powers at all, and he's generally accompanied by Mr. G, who could very well be his brother, just a lot bigger. We don't get that many details about him over the course of the story outside of the fact that he seems to have a very strong sense of justice, which is a very good trait to have in a member of a government organization, hopefully. We are also introduced to the current team of heroes of Unit M, who are Lucas Beckett, who seems to be our run-of-the-mill gun for hire muscle man. Nothing too special about him. This seems to be a very normal human, except for his combat abilities, which seem to be significant. We have Danielle on the left here, who seems to be an exhibitionist or a magic user, one of the two. Not sure if he's from Latin origin or American Indian. I'm not quite sure. We're not don't get him much out of any of those characters throughout this story. The last one we have is Julian, who is a vampire who doesn't want to work with the bad guys. That's about what we get. But it does give us a eyes on all of those characters who will likely become more important and more well developed over the course of a few issues. We're also introduced to a bad guy who do not directly affect the story at end. Seems to be called the Inquisitor. Creepy dude in Spain that seems to be hunting down a lone priest. He's a rather sociopathic individual that liked causing pain and earing people in pain while he was in his youth. And he doesn't seem to be a very pious individual, at least as far as the Roman Catholic Church goes. Maybe the Church of Satan would like him, or any other of those organizations. Seems to be a rather nefarious individual, but once again, we don't get too much information on him either. Let's go to the story. So, our heroine awakens from a nightmare on the day she was given an interview with the mysterious Level M organization of the government. So, she wakes up a little bit too early, still manages to take a shower and get ready to go to the interview. On her way there, she gets accosted by a creepy dude in a red hoodie in the metro, telling her really cryptic things while she's getting cryptic messages on her cell phone at the same time. Then again, she's in the public transit in a major US city. Probably not a thing that would be that unusual for her in this day and age. She gets to the office and gets picked up by a G-Man, who's actually Agent Beckett, dressed up in his full G-Man outfit. If you like Man in Black, that's kind of what to expect here. She trips when she tries to greet him, saying that she trips when she's nervous. And they get into an elevator going to the basement, and Beckett seems to be asking some rather silly questions to her. But there might be more to it than that, but we're not given more details as of yet. Director Loomis welcomes Nancy and gives her a quick interview, and he's clearly interested in her as a potential asset. Nancy points out that there's real evil in the world when he says that there's evils in shades of gray. It seems to have a very good reaction to that statement. And Loomis does say that they have a very good training program for new agents and field agents right before he has to leave for another engagement. All while this is going on, we get our scene with our funny little Inquisitor dude in Spain. Maybe he's undead. I'm not quite sure here. Maybe just demonically possessed. One of the two. He's torturing a priest, and it is a rather creepy scene, and it works really well in my opinion as far as that particular scene goes. Back in Washington D.C., Nancy is going for a drink with her friend Catherine, right, a friend from college, but they are stalked by the same man who had come to talk to her in the metro in the morning. So they leave the bar in rather of a hurry, while reminiscing of their past at the college and the fact that Catherine has to leave the next day. They try to cross a park, and the weird man here turns into a weird monster-like creature, same kind of scarring and patterns as our Inquisitor friend earlier. So once again, I'm not quite sure if it's an undead, if it's demonic possession or anything of the sort. But as Catherine is trying to call the cops, she unfortunately meets her demise by the end of the rather nasty individual. Luckily for Nancy, Beckett, David, and Julian show up to the rescue and to fight our resident jerkface, but they are somewhat not really strong enough to defeat him. They basically anger him more than anything else. Pistols don't seem to do much. Missile dropkick doesn't seem to do much. Danielle's magic doesn't seem to be super effective. And Julian doesn't quite like the blue flames that are there. For a vampire, it's kind of understandable. It is a rather rough situation. As Julian gets stopped by the Hellfire, the jerk tries to take a bite out of Nancy and overpower her, but her power seems to trigger, and a bunch of plants take control of the jerk's body and basically restrain him. Danielle uses his magic, or power, not quite sure what it is yet, to disable the monster, and Director Loomis shows up, telling Nancy that she got the job and that she starts tomorrow with a debriefing. Of course, Nancy has quite a few choice words to our crew here, but that's roughly how the issue ends. So, a fairly tight introduction story, very little breathing room, but not much breathing room is actually needed here. So this is a very decent little story. It could need a bit of work. We're going to talk about it a little more later, but overall, fairly satisfying to read. As far as the covers goes, there's two covers for this particular book. Once again, it's a bit of an investment for an indie creator to have two covers, because each cover is going to cost you, depending of course on who you're hiring, but it would be something in between $500 to $5,000. I mean, if you're going for an EVS cover, you're probably should get ready to dish out the cash. But there's quite a few artists that are ready to do it, but the price for a cover is rather high. So having multiple covers, not always the best choice if it can be avoided. It does have the advantage of potentially having people wanting to buy both covers. So it's a risk versus rewards investment. Two covers, I think, is reasonable. Seven, now you're getting into crazy land issue. Primary cover features the entire team, all in action poses. We've got Nancy in the middle. We've got Loomis in the back with the other G-Man. We've got Beckett, Daniel, and Julian. We've got a creepy cat in the tree, which we do see in the comic as well. We'll talk about it later. This is the kind of cover that would attract the eye and probably move units for the novelty of it. People looking at this would be like, yep, this is an 80s or 90s style comic. Perfectly understandable, perfectly reasonable, and easy to pick up. I don't see any issues with this cover at all as far as a production cover. Second cover as our evil undead Inquisitor guy and some weird demon dude that we do see a few times pop up in the comic. It's a very nice cover as well. It only reflects a very small part of the book. We have a very nice play of red, black, and white throughout here. The flames effect at the bottom are really good. Not sure if those were drawn or if those were digitally added either. So that's actually a good thing overall. This would be a very good collector's edition cover or an interior cover for the compilation. Something along those lines. As a cover for this particular issue, it would actually probably turn people off if it was on a rack because they would be expecting a really creepy horror comic. And as you start reading it, it's far more of a superhero comic. A bit of a trade off here. Obviously, not a bad cover. Like I said here, not for a front issue, but maybe for a compilation, a trade. That would be a really good thing to have. I only got the digital copy here because the shipping on a 24-page issue is crazy, about the same price as the issue itself. Unfortunately, it's not worth it. Okay, I'm nothing against the creator, nothing against any of you indie people creating templates and things like that. If you want people to buy the physical copies, especially international buyers, it's sad, but we probably want to have more than 24 pages. Maybe 3, 4, 5, 6 issues in, or if there's a compilation that comes out, that would be something I would buy. Shipping at, let's say, you buy the book for $44, the shipping's $22, it's 50%. It's a bit expensive, but for a physical copy, for someone you want to support, it's worth it. If it's, equal price, 100% shipping, it starts getting really crazy. And 24-page issues, I know it's the standard for industry, for American comics, but I mean, you have to think that's 18 pages. If you were talking about a Franco-Belgian comic, that would be, a little bit more. It would be the 30 to 32 pages if we were talking manga. You have to start to think cash versus reward in the long run. I'm not complaining or blaming the author for going with a 24 pages issue size. It's the standard, and it's actually what's being taught quite a lot. If you get books and if you get discussions around, it's what's really taught by a lot of the material you have to learn from. So not terrible either. The PDF itself is very lightweight. It's convenient. It was basically just emailed to me rather than having to go through a separate website or something like that. I would appreciate, same thing that I recommend to a lot of people who do those kind of publishing, get a signature system to track the comics that you're giving out in this form in order to reduce piracy. It's not a huge thing. It's not going to reduce piracy by a huge amount because people that want to pirate thing, they end up pirating them anyways. But a small digital signature, a small user tracking ID or something like that. It's not a terrible idea for these, especially if you want to do this in the long run. Always something to keep an eye on or keep in your mind. Color in this is a little bit duller than I've seen in many digitally colored works in the past, but it's not a bad thing overall. It actually keeps the same scheme throughout. It's actually better than some other indie comics that I've seen where the color scheme kind of shifts page to page, which gets annoying. So it's a dollar palette. So whoever did the coloring for this did a good job with a dollar palette, which is very nice to see, especially in something that is a bit of an or kind of comic. At the end, we have a few pages of fan arts, which is pretty cool. Always like to see that. We've got our heroine, we've got Julian the vampire, we've got the Inquisitor, we've got a little bit of everything. There's 4 pages. Yeah, there's 4 pages of these fan art. It works. We get a nice next issue page as well. The wolf at our door with a big ass werewolf. I hope the werewolf joins the team because werewolves are my favorite mythological creatures in that kind of category. I just love the big furry beasts. It's always funny. Who knows where this is going to go, but this is once again a bit of an horror team. Fun to have in these kinds of situations. Get an ad for Fund My Comic at the end as well. It's my go-to for crowdfunding right now. If there's any new thing that comes out, I'll always look at Fund My Comic first to see if they've put up something there. 3% platform fee, really, really good, and they're not annoying you when you're trying to check out with a 50% tip. They say, do you want a tip or not? And leave the square blank. I usually tip whenever I buy stuff on Fund My Comic, not by huge amounts, but I usually tip a little bit. I would have an idea of how those tips could be used in order to help smaller creators, but I'd have to talk to the people at Fund My Comics, and I'm not that well positioned at this point in time. Artistic merit. So there's a lot of art in there, as is the comic. Okay. Artistic merits. There's a lot of little things that we need to talk about here, and there's a range of things at the same time. We're going to start by a thing that's often an issue in smaller independent projects, which are the backgrounds. We were lucky when we were looking at things like Mary Boys, where the backgrounds were either fantastic or absent. We had Alpha Dogs as another example, where the backgrounds were there. It's about what they were. They were there. Here we have backgrounds that are perfectly functional. They work as what they're supposed to do. It's not top of the line work like you would see in Franco-Belgian comics, as an example, or below the line like in a lot of manga. It works for what it is. It complements the character, complements the action. The side characters that we see in the back there at the bottom right, as an example, work perfectly fine. Background characters, background work themselves works as they're intended. So I've got little qualm about it. I'm not going to celebrate it, but I've got little negative to say about it, which is a good thing when looking at independent projects. We do have a nice variety of characters, and there are different enough features between them to make them recognizable from one another. We don't have the one size fits all for women or men, which is a problem that we see both in the independent comic or in professional comics at time, especially in that early 90s period. There is one appearance by a cat in this issue. Well, two panels have the cat in it. It's decent enough, but it would require more work by the artist in order to recreate a proper cat, I guess. It's workable as far as an animal art go, but animal art is a pain nowadays because everybody knows what almost all animals look like nowadays in a world of TikTok and internet and animal memes. So when you are introducing a character, unless you are playing in the cartoon field, it has to look pretty realistic in order to have a convincing effect. Here, it works. I wouldn't recommend it, but it works. We get some weird facial warp on a lot of the characters. I'm going to go with Nancy mainly here, where there's one panel where she has a very feminine face, while another panel she seems to have a stone cold jaw. We have the same kind of warping on a few other characters and few facial shifts that make them look weird for a panel or two. This is probably more an effect of the artist learning how to draw the character, learning how to reproduce them in different angles, the different effects. It's not always the easiest thing to do. Panel work, however, is really good overall. The page real estate is really well used. We've got bleeding panels. We've got art that goes in and out of the panels and the bubbles as well. Here you can see in this example page where the bubbles are really well positioned to move the action forward. It's easy to follow. It controls the flow of the story really well. This is much better than a lot of early Franco-Belgians that we've just looked at recently, and easily matches what we have in current day American comics. It kind of feels like I'm dumping a lot on the artist here, but overall, this is good work. Okay, there's nothing catastrophically bad in there. There's room for improvement, work to be done, but that's how it should be. And if this becomes a mainstay as a way, or something that you publish 3, 4, up to 6 maybe times a year, this could be a very, very good experience for the artist. A lot harder to do interior work than to do just those pinup covers and those pinup work, like a lot of people keep doing. It's a thing that Eric July keeps talking about. As far as story elements go, we don't get a lot of backgrounds on any of the characters except for Nancy, and even for Nancy, it's a bit short as far as the explanation of what her life is. It does work here as a point of view character and a point of view story. Kind of reminds me of early Wildcats, where we add point of view characters usually being introduced or followed. So this is not a terrible thing overall, but not something that I would recommend easily if you want complete characters in your very first book. This is a background you see fairly often in various police procedural shows, even in some of the more horror-oriented ones, I guess. But it's something you would see in, like, Clara Starling in the Annabelle series or Elizabeth Keene in The Blacklist. Same kind of background overall. It's not a bad thing to use tropes, especially in these kinds of situations. It works perfectly fine, and it's a very good kind of role to have as possibly the brains of a team, being the criminal justice and investigation person on the team. Not a horrible character trait to have, and it makes her very competent while not making her over competent, like we sometimes see in many current day comics and current day stories, where our main character can just do everything. I really like the bit where we have a bit of spoken Spanish in the middle of the issue with the Inquisitor. It does enhance the ambiance that we have there, making it us feel that we're in Spain and not just somewhere else in the US. It does feel like it's missing a little bit of something. Not sure what. Maybe a full Our Father prayer or something like that would have enhanced the punchiness of this period of this piece. But once again, it works for what it is. You do get a nice range of character in what I will assume is the future main team. But I would have liked to have just a little bit more time spent on Danielle. He's supposed to be a mage, I'm pretty sure, but we don't get any explanation for any of them. A vampire, very easy to know what he is, how he's going to act, pretty much his range of abilities, unless we're in Twilight. A mage or someone with magical powers like this needs a bit more explanation for us to be able to follow it. We do get the good old evil comes in all shades of gray line in this particular book, but we get the response that, yeah, but there's real evil out there. Child molesters and someone who kills their child. There are things that are clearly evil. And this is a nice change of pace for a lot of comics and mainstream media that we have, to have something clearly delimited as, well, this is good and this is evil. Unfortunately, this is not a super well paced first issue, in my opinion. There's issues here that are structural in terms of pacing. We have to remember that this is the first issue, and it's the first part of an issue, which needs to gather our interest and make us want to read further. And the first bit of this, we do have that weird nightmare at the start, but after that, it's basically I'm going for an interview at an office, which is not super interesting in the grand scheme of things. A first issue like this should be able to attract the reader's attention within the first 2 to 3 pages and hook them from there. There's some people who don't like stories starting in media res, but I think in this case it would have worked a little bit better. You take the bar scene, you put it at the start, have Catherine killed, have the team introduced, then you flash back to earlier in the day, maybe actually have a little bit more of the team showing up during that interview period, just to tie things up a little bit neater. It would have attracted attention a lot quicker. We don't have any exposition dumps, however, through this, or no explanation for explanation's sake in there. So everything we have is within that realm of show don't tell, which is what I would want in a comic most of the time. The two scenes with the Inquisitor, because they're split in two sections, they are a bit out of place here, and you could have used those 3 or so pages to flesh out our main story or our main characters rather than introduce a villain which we have no connection with. Those are all structural issues that, well, nowadays can't be fixed since the book is already out, but can improve easily over time. But it would likely impact, off the rack buying if off the rack buying was a thing. I do still think that for these time of team up stories or team building exercise in a way, I would recommend people read the original Wildcat issues 1 and 2 by Jim Lee under Image. Those two issues were masterclass on how to do this the right way. There are issues with Wildcat issues 1 and issues 2. Let's not go into that right now. But as far as let's introduce a full team and have a decent understanding of what everybody is, probably some of the better work out there. Final thoughts. Well, as a first attempt, this is a pretty good comic overall. Would it sell gangbuster? Probably not. It would sell on novelty. It would sell on, hey, this is a new person, this is a new team, this is a new studio. Off the rack, it would probably sell for people like me, people who like those new things that they can learn on and learn about. Some people might think that the price point looks high, but you have to realize that for an independent, there's a lot of things you need to pay to get the ball rolling. You have to think that there is a 3 to almost 10% platform fee that you have to pay through Indiegogo, Kickstarter, or Fund My Comic. Thankfully, only have a 3%. But then you have to pay for your artist, you have to pay for your coloring, you have to pay for flattening, editing. There's a lot of things that come into play here that end up eating up any amount of money that you could possibly make. $1 for the digital tier is a good deal overall, honestly. If you're in the US and you can get the shipping at a decent rate, and it's not a bad thing to just, buy the first issue to get ready for issues 2, which is around the corner already from what I've seen from the creator. Really happy to hear that. The creator also got a bunch of merch created when he did his first campaign, which is something I don't always like because I'm not a huge fan of putting your money into merch rather than putting your money into the product that you're trying to release. But the author basically told us that those are evergreen products, and having looked at them, yeah, they're pretty much evergreen. They'll be able to sell as long as the comic is in circulation. They can be reused in the future. Every campaign can have a tier with those add-ons to them. So for that, it's not a terrible thing since they already have a production run of them. Hopefully they have enough to finance things in the future. Not a terrible idea. But as I keep saying here, you have to be careful when dealing with merch because often enough you can shoot yourself in the foot as well, putting a lot of money into something that won't have a whole lot of return. Would I recommend this comic? Probably. I mean, it's pretty good. Anybody from 7 to 77 can really read this if they're into light horror, basically. And it's the kind of product that I can see having pretty good improvement issue over issue and product over product. Overall, a good first attempt that I would recommend when issue 2 comes out. It is probably something that I will jump on as soon as the campaign releases to move things forward. I mean, this is not a bad investment overall. And I always like to see smaller creators move in the right direction and get the ball rolling. So I thank you very much for listening to me today. I hope you guys have a very nice rest of your day. Keep on reading comics, keep on enjoying them. I'll keep reviewing them and analyzing them, and I'll see you guys later. Bye bye.